Hey, what's going on? My name's Robert, and you are watching Southpaw AutoWorks. This is the GM Turbo-400. We're currently working our way through a build series on this transmission. This episode is all about the bushings. Without further ado, let's get this show on the road.
I want to talk a little bit about bushings. Once again, we're not going to take the time in the video to show you how to replace the bushings. I guess the main thing I can tell you is there are some critical bushings. Some of your overhaul kits don't come with a full set of bushings. I always buy the full set. Some of them will just come with what they call critical. There's more than just those, okay? One would be the one that goes in your pump body behind the seal here, okay? That can be definitely a critical bushing. You want to replace that on every rebuild, okay? What I would tell you about most bushings is to try and note any depth that it sets in the pocket, okay? So we could measure the depth of that pump bushing with a dial caliper or something, get an idea where it sets. I'll just take a marker and mark it right on the pump, press the bushing out, push the new one in, make sure we've got it back at the same depth, okay? Center support on this is a real critical bushing. Long bushing provides a lot of support in this transmission, so it's a critical one. This sun gear shaft rides in there, okay? And that's supporting a lot of components. So that's one you definitely want to replace, but it is also one that's probably the toughest to replace because of the length, okay? That's going to fit in the center support itself, and you've got to press that out of there and back in again. And I think we've got a close-up, but there's our critical point, is that slot, when installed into the center support, has got to leave that hole open right there. That's the bottom hole here in the center support itself. That's a lubrication hole, so that's extremely critical, okay, that be lined up when you press your new bushing in, okay? Most of the rest of the bushings in the transmission don't have any type of a hole to line up. That's definitely critical in this one, okay? And what I do is press that new bushing in, and then you take whatever component that fits in there, okay, slide it in and check the fit of the bushing, okay? And one little quick note here on those, what you can do is lightly tap with the edge of a hammer, not the metal part, the handle itself, or a rubber mallet. If you've got a bushing that's a little draggy, a little tight, this one of course is smooth, it's the old bushing, you can smack that in a couple of different angles, okay? That'll help smooth that bushing out or any high spot, okay? Make that smooth again. We don't want any bushings that bind, okay? Another one would be in this planetary carrier here, pretty wide bushing, also carries a lot of load. I would definitely replace that one, okay? And that is helping support this center support or the drum off of that. Once again, that sets down on there. We lift slightly and we can kind of see that it rocks a little bit. New bushings aren't necessarily going to take all the play out of it. Sometimes you feel the bushing fit, you knock a new bushing in or press a new bushing in, doesn't feel a whole lot better. Okay, not that unusual. Tolerances, unfortunately, these days on the bushings are not held that tight. So, sun gear shaft has a couple little bushings in it, okay? That rides on this main shaft right here. We can check the fit once again, trying to see just how much clearance or play is in there. Those usually are not loose. They don't wear that often. You've got a set, go ahead and knock them in, okay? You can replace those. And then one of the biggest ones that I like to do is going to be the case bushing, okay? This is the factory, if you will, case bushing, okay? That rides in the very back of the transmission case. We're going to show you that in here in just a second, okay? I'm going to replace that with this bushing here, okay? And as you can see, right there, it's got a little top hat, a little ledge on it, okay? That's an aftermarket bushing. Okay, I sourced that separately. Those don't come in the bushing kit. Okay? Reason behind that is the rear case bushing sometimes has a tend to want to work its way out of the back of the case, become loose or spin out of there. This was redesigned so that you could drive it in all the way into the bottom of the case and it would stop against the edge of the case and thereby wouldn't allow itself to walk or spin out of the back of the case. Okay? It's got a little different design, some different lube grooves. Okay? Works on the 400s and also its brother, the 4L80E.
So we originally planned on ending the video right about here. However, after thinking about it some more, we decided that we couldn't just talk about the bushings, but we actually needed to show what it takes to tackle the bushings on this Turbo 400. In the next segment, we're going to show what it takes to remove the old bushings and replace them with new bushings. And there are a couple of ways to go about that, and we will be touching on both of those methods. And like always, we'll be including some pro tips and tricks along the way. Need parts and tools for your Turbo 400 build? We got you covered. Check out the resources section in the video description down below.
We want to show you some procedures on how to replace some bushings. We've had some requests to see how to replace some of these bushings. And in the case of some of them, we can simply go to the arbor press out a bushing such as like the extension housing one here, and then press the new one in. But on many of them, they're kind of a blind setup, like the output shaft here. We can't simply just press that out. We would just press it further into the pocket. So what we're gonna do is show you how to get some of these out using a chisel to knock them loose. And then any time that we have an opportunity, we'll of course go to the press and press the new ones in. So we're gonna start with this output shaft bushing here, this little support guy. We're gonna use the vise to hold this while we're whacking on it. And basically all we're gonna do is take a chisel that we've made up here and drive that down in there, try and collapse or squeeze that bushing out of there. Main thing is that we just obviously don't want to damage the bore that it sits in. So we'll use this chisel and work behind it and get as best angle as we can, like I said, without doing any damage. So we'll clamp this in the vise to hold it for us so we're not chasing it around. We've got what we would refer to as soft jaws, which is either aluminum, wood, whatever, in between the vise jaws so that we don't damage whatever we're clamping. And we'll take this chisel and try and come in at an angle behind that bushing and simply collapse it down in there as we go. Crush it, whatever we got to do. Like I said, trying to keep an angle to get behind a bushing rather than cut the bushing and then not damage the bore that it rides in. Most of the components here are pretty hard metal, so it would take a little bit of doing, but you can still damage the bore that they go into. And what we run into there is if you've damaged that bore you put the new bushing in, it'll collapse or shrink that bushing just enough to where it's going to be a probably overly tight fit. So if I do booger it up, I'll take a file and go down here and clean that up so that the new bushing doesn't have a problem into that bore. So option here is, like I said, we can knock this bushing in right here, right now, in the vise, our replacement, or we can go over to the arbor press and do it. In this case, I think we'll use the arbor press. So we'll take that out of the way. We'll see how this sets up in here. Looks pretty good. Now what I'm going to do, like I do on most bushings, I'm using an oversized bushing driver, and I'm going to push that bushing in until it sits flush, and then I'll go with the proper size bushing driver to fit inside of it to get any more depth down into the pocket that I need. Now this is a little bit different bushing than we took out. There were two different widths of bushings that they made for these. I think one was early and one was late. If I can use the wide one, that's what I use. It just depends on if the pocket is deep enough. Now, some of these have an oil hole in them, and this output shaft, if it had a hole in it, we would line up with that, but it does not. The only thing this, I think, is going to have is a little oil groove, which is going to be connected right here to that journal. and down into there. So what I would be concerned with is if we push this bushing in far enough, we don't want to cover up that, but we do have a notch in the bushing. So what I'm going to do is line that up with the hole. And be aware this wide bushing may not fit, probably will not fit in many of the output shafts. I don't remember if it was an early or late thing, but if I can put a wider bushing in, I'm going to put a wider bushing in. So oversized bushing driver on there. We'll start with that. Press that in until it stops. That way I know it's started fairly straight, at least with that in the top of the bore. Now we'll find one that fit, there we go, inside, and continue to push that in. The main concern on this one, or at least one of them anyway, is you have to be below this surface far enough so that your Torrington bearing that fits in here, the little lip on the Torrington bearing, won't make contact with the edge of the bushing itself right there. That's basically our main concern. And I would say right now we're plenty deep enough. I don't know if we have the, yes, we do. Okay, so here's the Torrington bearing that I mentioned here. And if you can see that little lip right there, sticks down below that bearing surface just a little bit. So we want to make sure this is deep enough into the pocket as to not make contact with that guy right there. Okay, so here's our bearing that we're talking about off the back of the ring gear that when installed is going to be down against there. So we take that bearing, if in doubt, set that right in there. And what we want to make sure is that inner lip of that bearing does not make contact with the bushing. Looks like we're in a good position right there. So we'll stop and not push that any further deep into that pocket. And then what we're going to do is check fit on that bushing with the journal that it rides on right there. So, okay, making sure they're in there good. All right, a little bit of slop is okay. They're all going to have some movement to them. And I've mentioned it before in the videos. Unfortunately, you can put a brand new bushing in and it may not be any tighter than the one you took out. It's just kind of a judgment call, but if you buy the whole bushing kit, you might as well just stick them in there anyway. So at least the journal surface will be much nicer to work with. So, all right, we'll move on to the next one.
Real quick, if this type of content is adding value, please let us know by hitting that like button. It does help the channel, and we do greatly appreciate your feedback.
All right, next one we're going to go after is this bushing here that's in the carrier, planetary carrier itself. Once again, pressing that out is not an option because we can't get to it. The planetary pinions are in the way, so what we've got to do is knock that guy out also. I'm going to set it on the vise and drive that out with our same little chisel here. What we're going to run into on this one is once I knock it down to a certain level, it's going to want to hit whatever we're working on, bench or whatever. If we make enough room and spread the jaws of the vise enough to make it clear. Once again, just enough of an angle to get behind that bushing. This is a pretty wide one, so I'll work it back and forth side to side if I have to, because it'll get cockeyed in there. We're already moving pretty good. I think one more. There we go. Now we'll move over to the press. Push that one back in. Starting with an oversized bushing driver first, once again. Push her down until she's flush. In the case of this one, I like to put this down just a just a little bit below the surface. Do that with most just about any bushings. One option I didn't mention is if we were unsure about how deep to put this in, we should have probably made a note of depth, and then we could check the depth from the edge of the bushing to the top of the carrier itself, measure it with our calipers or something. This one's not real critical, so I just give it one little bump. There we go. And then the fit on that is going to be the surface down in here. This is kind of dirty. On that center support. So we flip that over, put it on there, raise it up just a little bit. No big issues there. And she fits good. There is a washer down in the center support that rides right here on this flat surface. So that's the reason I just give that a little bump to go below the surface slightly. Okay, one of the next one, as long as we got the center support, we'll do that one. And that's this big, long bushing here. Be aware, you do have the slot in here. Yes, that has to be lined up with the proper area. And what you're looking for on that is you've got your 4 metal sealing rings right here. And between the bottom 2 sealing rings, you're going to see the hole down there. There are other ones, be aware. In between, those are feed holes for our clutch and or lube circuit, lubrication circuit. And that's the one we need to line up, the bottom one, with that slot when it's installed. So what we're going to do on this guy, because it's a long bushing and we have the access, if we can, we're going to press that out, because obviously that's the easiest way. Knocking that out of there with a chisel is going to take half a day to do it. It can be a real pain in the arse. So we'll set this in the press and simply try and drive that one out and press the other one right back in. Okay, so what we're going to do is put the plate on the press here and try and get whatever the best fit is. What we're dealing with is the 3 bolts on the back side of this. Doesn't give us a real even surface to set against. We want to get it as straight as possible. So we can set it on that one, try and rock it, whatever the case may be. Make sure our bushing will press out of there as we go. We may have to align it as we go, but I'm going to do that, and then we're going to need a handle or extension at some point to get us the depth that we need to get that bushing pushed all the way through. So we'll get her started. Now, let's see if we got enough room. Nope. So we can do it any number of ways. Whoa. Stack a couple more bushing drivers, put an extension in there, whatever. You can see this one takes a little bit of force, so having a press is nice to do this one. So let's get rid of those. Come back, see if we can get our handle in here. There we go. Now, see if we can get that finished off. Nope, wasn't fast enough to catch it. Now, new bushing. That was picked up. Okay, once again, slot into bushing, find our bottom hole, lowest hole on our center support, and then try and line up that slot with that. Got it? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm going to rotate it around and try and eyeball this. If you had to, and I've done it in the past on some bushings, you can take your Sharpie, draw a black, a line down here. Might help you line up with this lube hole if you're concerned about that. I usually get pretty lucky on these and get them stabbed in there without a problem. Once again, slightly larger bushing driver to start with. Forward a little bit. Double check our alignment, and we go for it here. There. Okay. Now, if we done good, we should be lined up at that hole, which we are. We go right through there. And then once again, I'm going to give it just that last little push just below the surface. There. That should be plenty. And we'll check fit on that. That's supporting our sun gear shaft right here. Critical bushing on this one. Those are a high wear item, so that's definitely one you want to replace. What we're going to do is slide that shaft through there. It's pretty damn nice right there. Now, it had just a slight little burr to it, a little stick to it, stickiness to it. What I do is fit it. Especially if you have a tight spot or something in there, I'll just show you this. What I'm going to do is get that in the spot where you think it's a little sticky, a little tight. Side of the hammer handle, give it a little smack, rotate it around a little bit. Same thing. That will smooth that puppy right out. Just smoother than a baby's butt right there. That's what we want. So like I said, that is a critical bushing. Unfortunately, a lot of the kits don't come with that bushing. You do have to buy that separately. All right, next we've got the bushings inside of the sun gear shaft itself. And those are going to be the same so that you know, we'll just show you how to do one or two of these, as the bushing here that's in the stator support shaft right there. They give you 4 of the bushings in there on these that are the same size. Those fit down over the input shaft itself. What we would do there is lift up on the pump a little bit and see if it'll rock side to side. There's a little bit of movement there, and we can visually inspect those, but we've got a full kit. We can go ahead and do those if we want. I'll show you on the sun gear shaft, and for those, we're not going to try and press them through. That would be impossible. There's a step in there anyway, so we'll go back to the vise, knock one of those out, and press it back in. So we've got our sun gear shaft clamped in the vise here. A little less room to work with here on this bushing. We got to come in at an angle. Try not to beat up that shaft. Now this one will drive in a little ways and we're going to catch that little step in there. So it may kind of stop us. And what we've got to do is just keep working it until we collapse it or cut it enough to get it out of there. We've stopped against there, but you can see the other side starting to pop up a little bit. There we go. And what I do is this number, and then get your chisel in here. Just knock that puppy right out of there. So we'll show you how to do one side of this. Obviously, the other side's the same. We'll take it over to the press. And we'll push one of those 4 bushings in there. Got her in the arbor press, oversized driver. Run her down till she's flush. And then we'll try and find a smaller one. That'll go inside there. That work. Okay, we've got one that's real close here. Sit right on top of that bushing. What we want to do is put that just below the surface, like most of them, down just a little bit there. That looks pretty darn good right there. Okay, what we're going to do is check fit on that new bushing. That sun gear shaft rides over this little main shaft right here. And she slides right over, nice and tight there. And obviously, for the remainder of the 3 same bushings, other end of the sun gear shaft, and the 2 in the Stator, same thing, same procedure. We won't go over that for all 4 of them. The other one we'll show you is the case bushing in the far back part of the transmission case. So next one we'll show you is the case bushing, and we want to show you a couple options on that. I'll talk about that in just a minute. So the case bushing itself, just so you know, down in the bottom down here does stick above the bottom surface of the case itself. And we just wanted to make a little note of that first. So we're going to drive the bushing out from the back of the case in, and we can do that a couple different ways. Either with our bushing chisel and knock it down through, or in this case, if we've got enough room, we should be able to put the actual bushing driver that fits the new one right on top of the old one. Put our handle in there and drive that through till she drops out. Obviously, we'd much rather use the bushing driver at any point that we could rather than the chisel, so it's not to do any damage. So we simply drive that one out, flip the case over, we're gonna put it on our little stand here. Now, as I mentioned, we've got a couple different bushings here. We've got the factory bushing and an aftermarket bushing as an option. This would be one, obviously, would just come in your bushing kit or overhaul kit. This is a nice option to use that I like to use. It's a beefier bushing. It's got a step on it. The reason for the step is so that when it's driven down into the case, it stops and it will not walk or move any deeper or try and walk out the back of the case. Why do we care about that? Because there were some instances that the factory bushing, which does not have the lip on it, would do that, would spin or walk out the back of the case. We're going to show you how to install both. We'll start with the factory one. What I'm going to do here is start with our oversize, as I usually do. And I'm going to put the handle on that, set it down in there. Now, obviously, we can't reach that and hit it with a hammer. But what we'll do, they do make an extension for these bushing drivers, but I don't happen to have one. What we're going to do is use the old hometown method here and go with this big standard output shaft and just use that as a driver and an extension at the same time. So we steady this and simply drive that bushing down in there. Now, once again, we had a little bit of a step, and if we wanted to know exactly what that was, yes, I probably should have measured that with a caliper, but we're going to leave that setting up just a little bit. And the reason they did that is because your washer that sets down in here, it kind of helps to keep that centered into the back of the case, even though it has the 3 little tabs on it. So just go a little at a time until I can get the right height. I think probably one more will do it. And then what I would do is take my output shaft, set that down through there. Probably a lot easier if we just put the case up on the bench. But what we would do is set that down into the case and then check our fit on that bushing to make sure she's not binding up or anything. And once again, all we've got to do there, smack it around a little bit, fit that bushing a little bit, make sure she's smooth, and we're good to go. Now we'll show you the other one, the option of the aftermarket bushing. So just to let you know what that looks like with the bushing installed, this is our case washer. Sits in those 3 little tabs, sitting little grooves right there. Normally what I do on that output shaft bushing is I'm using the aftermarket one and I drive that flush. But the factory one, even though it was sticking up just a little bit into the case, normally I'll just go ahead and drive that down flush too. If Robert can get a good enough shot of that, that doesn't make any contact with the washer. So I don't know of any good reason to leave that sticking up too much. And like I said, a lot of times those bushings do walk. They can walk towards the front or the back, most commonly towards out the back of them. And then we'll show you how to put the aftermarket bushing in. So we'll show you how to put the aftermarket bushing in with this little top pad or edge on it. Simply going to drive it all the way down the bottom of the case till she stops. So once again, oversized bushing driver, handle, and our cheater bar here. That's down, my ears are ringing. Now we'll show you what that looks like with this washer, and I'll make a note here. Sometimes I have found with the aftermarket bushing, which is the one I prefer to use, that the washer that goes in the case, of course, has to hook these tangs in the slots in the case. Sometimes I've had to grind a little bit off one or two of these little tangs in order for it to set down in there flush again. So just be aware that if you use that bushing, which I would recommend, that your washer does sit flat in the bottom of the case. Let's try this one and see what it looks like. When Robert gets a shot of that, you'll see the little lip on that's going to sit much closer to the washer itself. So that does become the issue where that washer may not sit flat. This one looks really, really good. I don't think we have to do anything with it. So your extension housing bushing, so you're aware, they did make the extension housing and or bushing in different sizes for different applications. And this bushing that we have here is for the larger application, which this one is not. I don't know if you can see that in the picture or not, but that bushing is much larger than the one we've got in this housing. So be aware of that when you're getting your bushings or bushing kits. There are different sizes available. Making sure this one actually would have been a lighter duty because it's a smaller deal there, and it would have a smaller slip yoke and so forth on the drive shaft. This was for the heavier duty that went in the trucks or bolt up yokes that went in there. That one, of course, we can just press in and press out in our arbor press.
At this point in the video, we've covered what it takes to remove an old bushing and, of course, reinstall a new bushing. In each of the examples previously shown, the bushing was driven down to flush with the top of the bore, and then the bushing was driven just below flush, and that was good for those bushings. However, there are some other bushings in the Turbo 400 that are driven a lot further down than just below flush. In that case, Andy and I would definitely be grabbing a depth measurement of the old bushing prior to removing that old bushing. That way we know exactly how far down to drive in the new bushing. This is our go-to tool when measuring depth. This is the dial caliper. It's equipped with internal jaws, external jaws, and a depth rod coming out the base of the handle. Prior to measuring our depth, we will make sure that the tool is zeroed, which it is, and then we're going to extend the depth rod way further than we need. The end of the rod is placed right on the top of the bushing, and then it's a matter of sliding the handle down until it makes contact with this portion of the bore. We've got a reading of roughly 242 thousandths of an inch. Then it's just a matter of knocking out this old bushing and driving in the new bushing down to the correct depth. While we're on the topic of dial calipers, I wanted to share that we previously dedicated a video to the dial caliper. It's all about learning how to read one. So if that's of interest to you, and if all goes as planned, there should be a pop-up that appears in the upper portion of your screen. And if all else fails, you can find a shortcut to that video in the video description down below. This show is a ton of hours to produce, and we could use your support. You can learn more by checking out the video description down below. So we just got done going through the Turbo 400 bushings. Up next, we're going to be diving into the transmission case. Specifically, we're going to be sharing what it takes to get the transmission case prepped and ready for assembly. If you haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell too, so you don't miss out on any upcoming videos. Once again, my name's Robert, and I will see you next time.